I want to look for a little bit at another great scene in this act. Scene 4. This is the famous scene between Hamlet and his mother, Gertrude. And it's a very famous scene. It's a very dramatic scene. In productions of Hamlet on stage or on film, a lot of scenes get cut or condensed or somehow, worked around like, we got to trim this down. No audience really wants to sit through that long a piece. But this scene is always included in there because it's such it's so dramatic. Because so much of his pent-up feelings of frustration for his parents as a couple, and for his role in life and his identity is just bound up in his mother. And so this is the only scene where we really get the two of them alone. And that's kind of his problem as well. She's always with Polonius, or always with Claudius, and he is just riven with jealousy over that and resentment that she has seemed to move on with her life after the death of King Hamlet, and Prince Hamlet just can't do that. He can't move on. We've spoken in the past about how the medieval model of aristocratic marriages was, light on romance, I think you can say. It's uncertain that Gertrude and King Hamlet ever had a particularly romantic life. They were probably quite divergent in age, and certainly I think you could say temperament. Based on the evidence that we have, King Hamlet is very reserved, very grim. Just the evidence that we have of him as the ghost dressed in battle armor. He is known for going off to war. The dialogue begins with a kind of note of confused identity. Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended. Hamlet responds, Mother, you have my father much offended. You can see immediately he is so smart, so fast, so whip smart with language particularly, that she says something to him and he rhymes it right back to her. He says, no, you have. He's so smart. But that whole notion of, no, they're working on two different interpretations of the word father here. And this is really significant. For Gertrude, she is talking about Claudius, who is kind of sitting in the role of the father as a stepfather here. And his response is that, no, that is legitimate. That is him just playing a role like an actor would, and that is not true. My father is King Hamlet. Have you forgotten? And this division between them, this is sitting between them as a real sticking point. Gertrude wants to move on, and you could see that maybe she seems to have a pretty good relationship with Claudius. She seems to be genuinely in love at different times. Different productions will play up different aspects of this, of course, but they seem to have a reasonably decent relationship, and she wants to move on from mourning for a husband she probably did not have a particularly good relationship with. Gertrude presses him to know what she has done. What is her offense? She says, what have I done that thou darest wag thy tongue in noise so rude against me? If you speak Shakespearean lines out loud to yourself, sometimes you can understand what is being said where that doesn't make sense on the page, but also you get the thrill of just the way these words spark in the mouth as they go. In this case, what have I done that thou dost wag thy tongue in noise so rude against me? She is citing that same recurring theme of empty and failed communication. Meaning seems to be a mystery behind the confusion of words. Hamlet responds with even more words, more sound and fury signifying nothing. This soaring rhetoric that never actually answers her question. He says, such an act that blurs the grace and blush of modesty, calls virtue hypocrite, takes off the rose from the fair forehead of the innocent love, and sets a blister there, makes marriage vows as false as dicers' oaths. Oh, such a deed as from the body of contraction plucks to the very soul, and sweet religion makes a rhapsody of words. Heaven's face doth glow over this solidity and compound mass with heated visage, as against the doom is thought sick at the act. I'm kind of hammying it up a little bit with the pronunciation in a way that Shakespeare, of course, and Hamlet also would poo-poo, but you can see he's digging up, dredging up all of this language that is very poetic and very soaring and very outraged. But he never answers the question of what she has done. The action is different from the words. There are lots of words, but understanding and identifying action is distinct here. Gertrude presses even further. Ay me, but what act that roars so loud and thunders in the index? He is roaring so loud and thundering with all of this soaring rhetoric. But Hamlet still deflects and gets distracted in a lot of images. Look here, this picture, and on this counterfeit presentment of two brothers. So here he's showing up like a locket, essentially, usually in most productions, with the image of each of them, Hamlet and Polonius, side by side. See what a grace was seated on this brow, Hyperion's curls, the front of Jove himself, an eye like Mars to threaten and command, a station like the herald Mercury new lighted on a heaven-kissed hill, a combination and a form indeed, where every god did seem to set his seal to give the world assurance of a man. This was your husband. That's how he sees his father. As a god, Hyperion. It's not a comforting image. It's not a cuddly image. It's not, gee, Dad. It's not a particularly warm image for a husband either. She would have had to cuddle up against a god at night. That imperious god. That's hard. Now look at what follows. Here is your husband, like a mildewed ear blasting his wholesome brother. Have you eyes? Could you on this fair mountain leave to feed and batten on this moor? There he's comparing King Hamlet to a mountain and Claudius to a moor, essentially a marshland, a swamp. Again, a mountain. Who wants to be married to a mountain? But it gives you a sense of the scale at which he is seeing these things. This is his perception. It's not necessarily an objective truth. This is his perception of what these two men are like, the comparison between the two. And you can see how he is working it up so that his father is awesome and overwhelming, huge and imposing. How does a son live up to that? How does a son see himself in that comparison, because he's comparing an image of Polonius, or again, of Claudius. I get those two names mixed up all the time. I apologize. But he's comparing the image of Claudius to King Hamlet. But how would he, and I think the implication is pretty profound, how would he then compare himself to that? Ha! Have you eyes? You cannot call it love, for at your age the heyday in the blood is tame. It's humble and waits upon the judgment. And what judgment would step from this to this? Sense sure you have, else could you not have motion. But sure that sense is apoplexed, for madness would not err, nor sense to ecstasy was ne'er so thralled, but it reserved some quality of choice to serve in such a difference. What devil was it that thus hath cozened you at hoodman blind? Eyes without seeing, feeling without sight, ears without hands or eyes, smelling sans all, or but a sickly part of the one true sense, could not so mope. O shame, where is thy blush? Rebellious hell, if thou canst muten in a matron's bones to flaming youth, let virtue be as wax and melt in her own fire. Proclaim no shame when the compulsive ardor gives the charge, since frost itself doth actively doth burn, and reason panders will. A lot of words there, a lot of outrage, a lot of TMI, quite frankly, in a lot of points, but not an answer to what she has really done besides marry Claudius, besides actively choose Claudius instead of Hamlet's father. This isn't necessarily accusing her of murder. She is never really implicated in that. But he just doesn't understand how she could give into her, how she could settle for something less than the ideal, the God that is the King Hamlet. Soon after that, the ghost enters, reminding Hamlet of his own guilt for not acting, for not striking revenge yet. You can see the ghost sitting off in the corner, tick tock, tick tock. And this is another instance in those middle scenes of the play where, okay, it's been a while since we've seen the ghost. Let's bring him back. We got to wake up the audience a little. They've been standing still for a long time. But the ghost is more than just, a sideshow attraction. The ghost is the father who is nagging the son, saying, why haven't you acted? He is berating his mother. He is in the act of berating his mother for performing an act, for choosing Claudius, for marrying Claudius, for getting on with life. And here, after building up the image of the former king to a godlike status, Prince Hamlet is stuck in opposition to him. He had been opposing Hamlet and Claudius, and now he is on stage opposed to King Hamlet himself. And that's a position of some anxiety for him. The judgment is what he fears from this mountain of a man, this God of a man. He feels he does not measure up. Now, this whole time, Gertrude is off in the corner, like, who are you talking to? What's going on? The ghost is entering. He's having a conversation with, what's going on? She can't see him. She can't see the ghost, or at least she says she can't. Hamlet says, "Do you see nothing there?" The queen says, "Nothing at all. Yet all that is I see." She cannot see through the physical. The physical world is all there is for her. He can see through. He can imagine, perhaps, something beyond. Maybe this is madness. Maybe this is insanity. Maybe this is a figment of his own imagination and a manifestation of internal guilt and anxiety and edible complexes and all of that. But she can't see it. "Did you nothing hear?" Queen, "No, nothing but ourselves." Hamlet, "Why, look you here, look how it steals away, my father in his habit as he lived. Look where he goes, even now, out of the portal." And the ghost exits. Just think about that little dynamic right there, that little moment. They click through the senses, just like in the speech preceding where he talks about all that you can see, or hear, or even smell at one point. He's talking about physical reality, always pointing those things out. But here she says, no, there is no physical reality to what you're saying. It's air. But that again is is the undercurrent that we've been talking about, where the language that the actors are speaking is all air. It is all smoke and mirrors, literally. It is all fantasy, the stuff of fantasy. Words, not necessarily truth, not objective reality. They're always toggling these things. And look at even the last lines that he offers in that. "Look how it steals away," the ghost, "my father in his habit as he lived." There you can see that's a little moment of him being a kind of a needy son, perhaps a little neglected. Look, my daddy's leaving, just like he always used to. Oh, isn't that sweet? It's a little moment where it's an Elizabethan cover of the old Harry Chapin song "Cats in the Cradle," where you realize the little kid is being neglected all the time, and you feel bad for that. But that's what you have to do when you are King Hamlet, the warrior king who's always leaving. So again, that's a little portrait of his psychology, a little peek into what makes Hamlet tick. He was a neglected child. He feels like he never bonded with his father. You get the sense that since the ghost showed up, this is the most maybe Hamlet has ever even spoken to his father. And imagine the pressure that puts on him. His father was always the man of action, always the man leaving off to go off and fight somewhere. And here's Hamlet, who does not measure up in that way. He is not a man of action. He is not a great warrior. He does not go out and fight. Why isn't he leading a battalion against Fortinbras at the border right now? Because he's caught in his mind. He is not the man of action. He's the man of thought. But how does that measure up for his father? Does his father value being a man of thought? Hamlet breaks down Gertrude emotionally to the point where she begs, "What shall I do?" And his answer is largely poetic gibberish. To this, again, Gertrude responds, "Be thou assured, if words be made of breath and breath of life, I have no life to breathe what thou hast said to me." This is confusion and heartbreak. She is trying to figure out what to do. She is trying to figure out what she is supposed to do, what he wants her to do. You have all of these words, you have all of this questioning, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Which is exactly Hamlet's predicament as well. And I think we can read this as Shakespeare's conception of the role of humanity in this modern era of history, where we have all these questions, we have all these abilities to think, we have all of these abilities to doubt and to wonder and to see through to the other side and always turn things around in these limitless frames of our mind, but we can never actually do anything. We never know what we're supposed to do. We never know how to act. That's modernism. That's the modern world. The early modern world begins at the Renaissance, and Shakespeare has Hamlet as the quintessential modern man. And Gertrude is just trying to get by. And how do you deal with this? If words be made of breath and breath of life, I have no life to breathe what thou hast said to me. She's kind of giving up on the idea that the words have any significance. The value of the words is too complicated, is too attenuated. There's too much or not enough behind them to really know that they mean anything at all. Words are just fake. Words are just stuff and nonsense. Sound and fury. Noise. When pressed about his own plans for action, because she's concerned about him being insane. She wants to know, what is he going to do? Hamlet hides behind more language, hides behind metaphors, while he's hauling a corpse across the stage. He has killed Polonius. He thinks he's killing someone else. He thinks he's stabbing Claudius behind a curtain, but of course it turns out to be Polonius. He thinks he has pierced through the curtain of confusion to something true, and in fact it was only a lie. It wasn't who he thought. He was wrong about what was on the other side. And now at the end of the scene, Claudius is just kind of lying there, a dead corpse. And different productions will have different ways of going about this, but Hamlet is essentially just grabbing him and dragging him across the stage, kind of as an afterthought, while he is producing more language, while he is spitting out more colorful metaphors. Hamlet says, I must to England, you know that. Queen says, alack, I had forgot, 'tis so concluded on. We're given that little tidbit teasing that there is something coming, there is an action coming. At the end of one scene, Shakespeare has to keep his audience engaged and saying, okay, there's more coming, there's more coming. Don't give up on me yet. And he foreshadows some of that in a significant way. There's letters sealed, and my two schoolfellows whom I trust, as I will adders fanged. They bear the mandate. They must sweep in my way, then marshal me to knavery. Let it work, for 'tis sport to have the engineer hoist with his own petard, and it shall go hard, but I will delve 1 yard below their minds and blow them at the moon. He knows that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are going to escort him to England. He knows that there is a good chance that they will try and bring about his execution. They pretend to be his friends, but he knows that they are spies. He knows that they are working against him. So he will pretend to be their friend, and he will bring about their destruction instead. Always superficiality. always just empty words. Act 3, Scene 4 has a long history of very complicated interpretations. Many productions of this show and many Freudian critics dwell upon the kind of the Oedipal thing, the Oedipal dynamic between Gertrude and Hamlet, mother and son, and a kind of repressed sexuality between them. Hamlet appears alone in a room with his mom for this one time in the play. And again, different productions will dress this up in different ways. Sometimes she is in a nightgown. Sometimes there is a bed present. It's the blocking of the actors can sometimes become aggressive. Some productions, some films will make it seem as if at times Hamlet is in or on the verge of raping his mother. And the speech, that's all just surface stuff. But the speech, the words on the page, which is all we ever have to go by, are much more complex than that, much more ambiguous. Hamlet is asking her to refrain from her sexual identity, to steer clear of Claudius's bed. He says at one point, not by this means know that I bid you do. Let the bloat king tempt you. Let not this by no means that I bid you do. Let the bloat king tempt you again to bed, pinch wanton on your cheek, call you his mouse, and let him for a pair of reechy kisses or padding in your neck with his damned fingers, make you to ravel all this matter out, that I essentially am not in madness, but mad in craft. Now that's a tricky little speech to get out and a tricky little speech to understand, but there's a lot going on in there. He is saying he is trying to get his mother to refrain from going to Claudius's bed, to reject her sexual nature, which so horrifies him. Who wants to think of their mom and, their mom having sex with anyone, let alone somebody other than their dad. But here it's much more complex. Look at that first line. Not this by no means that I bid you do. She has asked him, what should I do? He responds this, not this by no means that I bid you do. That's a double negative, which is, confusing. Not this by no means. Well, does that mean that this is something you want me to do or not do? I'm not sure. And then he goes through everything that seemingly he does not want done. And they're very physical and they're very intimate. And that sense of revulsion is caught up in the physicality of that moment. Let the bloat king tempt you to bed again. Pinch wanton on your cheek, call you his mouse, and let him for a pair of reechy kisses or patting on his neck, on your neck with his damned fingers. All of this physicality horrifies him, and yet he is also saying it in a positive sense. If you take that first line off, it is him commanding her to go to her husband and allow him to do all of these things. And that's kind of easy to miss. Let the bloat king tempt you to bed again. Let him pinch wanton on your cheek. Let him call you his mouse. And let him for a pair of reechy kisses or patting in your neck with his damned fingers. Let him do all of that. It's so subtle. It's so confusing. Shakespeare knows when he's being confusing, and he uses confusing purposefully, because then you have to figure it out. And in fact, he says at the end, make you to ravel all this matter out. That's about interpretation. He's telling her, well, You need to go and figure out what I am saying here. I trust you to. Not just Gertrude, but the entire audience. Everybody has to ravel out this matter and figure out what the hell he's saying, because he's not saying it particularly straightforwardly. He's not saying it particularly honestly or truthfully or clearly. It is all an occlusion of language that we need to pierce to find truth within. This scene answers no questions. And Hamlet's first act of killing is essentially a side note. But it drives us deeper into this one character whose mind is a stand-in for all humanity and for the universe itself. This is at the heart of this play, and it is, in a chronological sense, at the heart of this play. If you get a copy of Hamlet, let's say a simple little play edition, and you don't have too much introductory matter or too many pages after it, and it's just the play, if you crack it open to the midpoint, the heart of the matter is Act 3. And here he's dealing with some of the deepest issues, not resolving them, not giving any answers about them, but opening them up so that we as an audience, as a readership, more as an audience for Shakespeare, can consider them with our own infinite minds and open up our own speculations.